Tara Livingston. Welcome to You Should Write a Book, the podcast. If this really was a book, this would be in the chapter called Growing Up and Growing Old. And the section would be called Funny Stories About My Mama. For those of you who have been asking, I'm sorry I've been absent for a few days. There's something that really wants to be told. It just hasn't untangled yet. So that will be coming soon. But today, I needed a laugh, so I thought I'd share the laugh with you. So join me as we hear some stories about my mama. I come from a family with a pretty good sense of humor. All of us were funny, and I think for all of us, my mom was our biggest fan. She delighted in nothing more than laughing at our attempts at jokes, at treating us as if we were the funniest, most delightful people on the face of the planet. Even to this day, I've realized that I still play to an audience of one, and it's my mom. Years and years ago, I had a brother who was living in Halifax, and his son was being baptized. So we lived in Hamilton. We decided that it would be a good idea to do a 3-day weekend to make it out there for the baptism. So my sister and my mom and I got into the car and we drove across the country. My mother, on the way home, we must have been somewhere maybe in New Brunswick, which doesn't quite make sense because we usually went through the States. But anyway, we were in New Brunswick and it was my mom's turn to sleep because doing that kind of marathon drive, it was about 22 or 23 hours, I think, of driving time each way. We were taking turns driving and sleeping and co-piloting. So my mom's in the back seat and we're driving along the highway in New Brunswick, and she pops her head up and she says, if you take the next exit and turn left, there's a Tim Hortons. I don't know how she knew where we were, but her and my dad had done the drive so often that she knew where all the Tim Hortons were. It was a big deal in our family. My oldest brother he was a bit of a dog. Anyway, he was dating, actually, he was living with his girlfriend. Let's call her Shannon. And he was also dating a woman named Shannon. So he showed up one day with a lovely bouquet of a dozen red roses that had been, uh, oh no, the roses had been sent to our house because, of course, the dating Shannon didn't know that he lived with a Shannon. Obviously, he couldn't take those flowers home with him, even though they were addressed to him. Something must have been happening in my sister's world. She was quite upset. I don't know. I can't remember what it was, but we decided that we needed some time away. So we had, as I've mentioned before, we had property in upstate New York, down near Bradford, New York. Look it up. It's pretty small. So my sister rented a car, and it was a hatchback, like a little Honda hatchback. We had no money, none of us, but we took our crocheting because we decided that's what we were going to do while we were in our trailer, the top of a mountain in a pine forest. So we packed all of our bags of uh, of wool into the back of this car, and we decided that we would take the roses with us. Nobody was home to enjoy them, so we might as well put them in the car. So my sister placed them, and they were there for the people who were following us to enjoy. She put them right in the back window. Anyway, so we get to the border and we're waiting in line. Now, keep in mind, this is pre 9/11. So the border crossings were much different back in the day. And we did them all the time. So they were quite normal in our world. So we're waiting in line, and the guy in front of us has a sunroof. And for some reason, the border crossing guard decides it would be a good idea to talk to this guy through the sunroof. So he's leaning over and asking the questions of this guy, and you can see the guy looking up and responding. And we thought this was hilarious. So it's our turn. We pull up to the border crossing, and my sister says, "Can you talk to us through our roof?" And the guy looks at us and says, "Do you have a can opener?" That was enough to set us off, and we got the giggles. Oh my gosh, we got the giggles. And so there's this border crossing guard with my mom sitting in the passenger seat, and he's sniffing to see if we'd been smoking marijuana. It was pretty funny. Usual questions: where are you going? Bradford, New York. Are you sure you don't mean Bradford, Pennsylvania? Yes, we're sure. We're going to Bradford, New York. And are you uh, leaving anything behind? And we said no. And he said, "What about the flowers?" And my mom said, "Well, they'll probably die." And that, of course, got us into a whole other fit of giggles. And yeah, so we got pulled over. Shocking, I know. And they ripped the car apart, had the dog sniffer things out and looking for drugs. Of course, there was nothing. And it really was. We just had bags and bags and bags of wool for our crocheting marathon. Oh my gosh, my mom and my sister and I, we could make each other laugh. She went in for surgery. She must have been in her 50s, maybe her late 50s. And it was on her girly bits. So she was having her first ever surgery. She'd never been in a hospital before, aside from, giving birth to babies. And she went in, she had the surgery, and she was coming out of the anesthetic, but she wasn't kind of coming out really well. They'd given her a button to push for pain medication, and she was pushing it like every 5 seconds. And she was kind of curled up on the bed. And this very young, very new nurse came in and said, "Mrs. Kirkpatrick, how are you doing? How are you doing?" And my mom just said, "Oh, I've decided not to have the surgery." And this poor young nurse looked absolutely stricken. She said, "Oh, but Mrs. Kirkpatrick, you've already had the surgery." And my sister and I were just in stitches because we knew that my mom knew she'd had the surgery. She was just trying to pull one over on this poor nurse. Trauma. As my mom started to lose her memory, and she had frontal lobe dementia, and she'd come out west to live with me and my family. She never lost her sense of humor. I went in to see her one day at the nursing home. We'd had to transfer her into a locked facility because she had become a wander risk. And the nurses said to my mom, they said, "Oh, who is this lovely young lady with you?" And my mom said, Well, I can't quite remember. And the nurse asked, "Well, how many children do you have?" And my mom said, "Oh, a gaggle." So my mom had a gaggle of kids, which I guess was kind of true. She did tell the nurse, "I don't know who she is, but I know she loves me." And that was all that was really important to me, I think. I came in one day to see her sitting on the bench beside uh, a man. His name was Roy. I saw him there all the time. Never heard him speak. He was a skinny man, always wore a cowboy hat and had a big belt buckle on, and they were sitting side by side on a bench. And my mom's eyes were twinkling. Oh, she was like a delighted young girl. And she said, "Oh, let me introduce you to this is my friend. This is my new boyfriend." And I said, "Oh," I said, "how lovely." I said, "Is he going to be my new father?" And she said, "Oh, yes, I think so." So apparently they'd been carrying on for a couple of days, and my mom was attached to his side all the time. I went up to the nurses and I said, "Going to have to watch this. They're going to have to, get a room." And the nurse became very serious and she said, "Oh, well, we we can make those arrangements." And I said, "Oh, really?" And she said, "Yes." She said, "If you think that it would be something that your um, mother without dementia would consent to, then we can make arrangements for them to have some alone time. But I have to tell you that we've already made arrangements with Roy's family, and he's attached to someone else." So, poor mama. She picked the only guy on the unit that was already hooking up with somebody else. Anyway, it faded. I got a call one day, and my mom had her blood pressure had fallen quite drastically. By that time, we knew that she had a heart murmur, and so she'd been taken by ambulance to the hospital. And so I hopped in my car, of course, and drove up to the hospital. Somehow I ended up being there as she was being taken out of the ambulance. And the two young ambulance attendants were laughing. And my mom had this big grin on her face. And uh, one of the young men looked at me and said, "Your mom she's got quite the sense of humor and she's quite a flirt." And I said, "Oh, yes, she is." And I said, "Hey, mom, how'd you do? Did you get his number?" And she said, "Oh, I was so close, but you interrupted." Oh, and I guess the young men, the ambulance attendants were telling me that she'd been trying the whole time to get them to take them out on a date. Oh, she never lost it. She was she was always a delight. Thanks so much for spending the time with me today. I hope that none of you heard this as disrespectful. This, in so many ways, was a tip of my hat to my mom and the memories that she left me. And I think she would appreciate it. In fact, I know she would. Wherever she is, she's laughing. Thanks for spending the time. Hope we get to do it again real soon. And wherever you're listening, hit subscribe. And we'll talk to you